Okay, so that's simplicity. Let's talk a little bit about balance. So in balance, we're thinking, do the different parts of the speech feel to be of appropriate length and complexity? So at one very basic level, the body of your speech, the main points, should be the longest part. I think that's pretty fair, right? So especially in an informative speech like this, if you've got 10 minutes, you spend 5 minutes on the introduction telling us about how awesome the concept's going to be when you get to it. Then you spend 1 minute talking about the concept, and then 2 more minutes going, was that not the most awesome thing in the world? That's probably a misallocation of your time resources. The body of the speech, where the core ideas are, where your main information delivering is occurring, is probably going to be the main portion of your time as a speaker. But in terms of looking at those main points, we're not looking to say, oh, I've got 3 main points. Each one of them is the exact same amount of time. That's not really the goal here, but that the points are appropriate to their scope. So you're not spending too long on a small point and not too long on a big point. So if we go back to that example research presentation that I discussed last lecture or 2 lectures ago, so if you're looking at this, we've got sort of my area of research, the procedure, the findings, discussion, implications. So we got a lot of points here. But many of these points are necessary for a research presentation because the audience is probably going to want that. Now, given that, you don't really want to spend too much time, especially for lay audiences, on that procedure. That procedure might be an important thing that you need to address, but you don't need to spend too much of your time there. And in fact, when I will work with scientists, this is the problem. Their life, or their interest, or their fascination has been spent on designing the research, figuring the stuff out. And the implications are fine, but they spend too much time on the procedure, also probably because it comes first, and they end up rushing through the implications. And for certain audiences, those implications are the speech. That's what they want to hear. The findings are the reason they're listening to this presentation, not how you set up the study. They might not know how, they might not care how. So the issue is, that's a point that in a scientific presentation you might have to include, how I designed the study. But that doesn't mean that you have to spend as much time talking about study design as you do about the findings. Based on the audience, you need to allocate time based on how much is appropriate for the needs of this particular audience. So simplicity, balance, and finally order. So order just simply speaks to, does the arrangement make sense to an audience member? Is there a logic driving your arrangement? And if it's not readily apparent on the part of the audience, are you explaining it? So if you've done all this work of putting together a logical speech, an organized speech, don't hide it. Explain it. Draw our attention to it. Provide and highlight the organizing logic of your presentation. So there are 2 really important findings I want to talk about. Okay, I know what you're talking about and I know where we're going. This project is going to move, once we get the funding, is going to move through design, through data analysis, and then finally data gathering, and finally into the analysis. Oh, that makes sense that you would organize it in that way. There's a sense of order there. There's a logic. That chronological order has a logic to it. So simplicity, balance, and order are principles that you can apply when evaluating your outline. It's a way of looking back on it and going, gosh, aesthetically, can I cut this down? Can I make it simpler? So I started this video lecture with a reference to a public speaking textbook. I spend a lot of time with public speaking textbooks. So I'd like to go ahead and sort of near the end here tie to another one. So William Keith and Christian Lundberg have an excellent public speaking textbook. And in their discussion of informative speaking, they've got a line that I absolutely love. And it is, clarity is the result of choices. And that's where we're at this point in the week and in your outline, is making the choices that can not guarantee, but at least drive greater clarity. And this is why last week I talked about that iterative approach, doing multiple passes on revising, reflecting, and running your speech. Because that first pass, when you're pulling that information together, you're probably still trying to figure out the speech. you're learning that material. You're learning how it fits together. You're still kind of, even though you're running it, you're very much in that invention mode. But only after you've run it a couple of times can you start to enact your judgment. And then you're making choices and decisions that are going to reach greater clarity for that audience. So what I would like you to do now, I've asked you to start pulling together an outline, and if you haven't, I ask you to do that now. But what I think you should do is go back to the outline that you do have, either for a speech for this class or for a speech that you're doing for outside of this class that's informative in scope, and apply these principles to your revision. Can you simplify and consolidate main points? Okay, can you make it simpler? Can you reduce how many levels there are on that outline? And then in terms of balance, are you putting time where you need to be putting time? For the topic, for the audience, or is there a misallocation? Do you really, deep in your heart, know you're spending too long in this point and you need to cut material out of it? And yeah, as much as you hate to admit it, you need to spend more time here, so you need to go find more material for it. And then finally, just looking at that outline, is the logic apparent? And if not, what can you do to make sure that that audience understands the logic? They're like, oh, it makes perfect sense that you would organize it in that way. So a speech is not a mystery novel. We shouldn't only know at the end why you did what you did. Oh, I did not know this was about a Mars rover. Fascinating. That's what you meant by that. So we're not doing that. Give us the organizing logic. Help us understand so that we can be an active member, as members of the audience, an active member of the creation of the meaning that is in your speech.